So, Jamie, thanks for your time today. Now I've been on YouTube for a long time. There's a lot of people I know on a personal level. Yourself, I only found about you recently. Can you tell me about your background and how you started your YouTube channel?
Yeah, sure. So been into boxing since a kid, really. My dad boxed as an amateur when he was growing up, and in my early years of life, sort of discovered that boxing was one of his passions, and it quickly became one of mine. And as I sort of started to become a teenager, my kind of route into boxing was I started writing about it. So I did a bit of blogging, did some contributions for some websites. Used to try and always get my sort of like letter of the week in the boxing news and Ring magazine and things like that. And then just as time went on, we started to move away from writing as the world has and start to become more digital. So I thought I'd launch a podcast originally, so it became the Punch Perfect podcast. But then just over time, started to move it into shorter videos and shorter form content, and it's kind of how we've got here.
Sounds good. You've done a lot of work. You've interviewed a lot of different fighters. Which videos for you do you feel have stood out? What are you most proud of?
So there's one that stands above all of them, and it's a very recent one that happened at the start of this year. So I got to sit down with Nonito Donaire, which for me was an amazing moment for myself. He's one of my favourite fighters. I always go back to the story of when I first got into boxing. It was a very simple search on YouTube of best knockouts or highlight knockouts and things like that. And in all of these videos, there was this one little guy just knocking everyone out with a left hook, and that was Nonito Donaire. And from there, he became one of my favorite fighters. I've kind of watched him go through a period of his career where he wasn't winning as well when he started to move up in weight, and as he's moved back down, he's having a great sort of run of form again at the minute. So getting to speak to him was amazing, and just the context of it as well, because he's such a nice guy. He's got such a reputation for that, but you can interview someone and perhaps they don't live up to your expectation. But speaking with him, he was early to the meeting. He was funny, he was friendly, and when the kind of camera went off, he stayed to chat with me and offer advice. And that for me will always probably be my favorite video, and it will take something big to top it in the future.
I was quite impressed by that. Quite impressive. Obviously, you're still a small channel. I mean, you're about twice the size of mine, but compared to the IFLs and Boxing Social, to get Nonito Donaire is quite impressive. Long term, where do you see your channel going? What are your goals?
So interviewing isn't something I'm particularly like hot on. It's not something I'm going to be doing much of in the future. I started to do a few interviews when I first started out, and then sort of made the decision that I didn't enjoy some of them, not because of the fighters I spoke to, but just I didn't feel quite as comfortable doing interviews. I'd rather talk about current things and fights and breakdowns. The Daenerys one came about, and it was an opportunity that I just couldn't refuse, so I wanted to do that. But moving forward, the breakdowns that I do, um, and the kind of prediction videos and working with other YouTubers and stuff is going to be a lot more of what I'm doing. And I just want to grow that. I just want to keep pushing it, keep it getting better. And I look up to Ade Oladipo, who's definitely been able to do some great things through having a boxing YouTube channel. So I'd like to do something similar.
Yeah, I'm a very sort of honest. Well, I don't like the word straight shooter gets overused a lot. There's plenty of people in boxing media I don't really like, and Ade Oladipo is definitely not one of them. Very likable guy, definitely not
Yeah.
one. I've met him, such a nice guy. Like, whenever I've met him, he's very supportive, and it's like he
Yeah.
tells you
Yeah.
about his journey, how we. And there was I've been around him. I first met him when Amir Khan announced on Twitter years ago. He said, "Oh, I'm going to be at this opening this milkshake place." So I went down there, and Ade went down. I met so. I've seen that was about it was when Foch fought Groves, it's like 2014, and
Yeah.
to
I
see
think
where
so.
he's come from there, is that what you're trying to do? Do you want to try and work in boxing in commentary or analysis, something like Johnny Nelson, these sort of people? Is that what you're trying to do?
Yeah, to be honest, I don't know what capacity I want to be involved in boxing, but it's just, you see some people that they have like a professional skill that they're good at, whether that be sales, whether that be marketing, whether it be technology, whatever it is that they're good at. and then they get to work in an arena or a field that they have a passion for, where they're able to sort of marry things together. Eddie Hearn says it all the time. It's like his dream job because he's a salesman. He likes to put himself out there, and then he gets to talk about the sport that he loves, that's boxing. He gets to bring them together. In my personal kind of professional line of work, I work in digital marketing and marketing operations. If there was a way that I'd be able to do that as well as work in boxing as the sport I love, I'd love to bring those two things together, because then you kind of get the best of both worlds. So not necessarily a commentary thing, not necessarily being in front of the camera, but just being able to be involved in the sport I love whilst doing the work I love would kind of be my ultimate dream.
Yeah, my advice for what it's worth. I know a lot of people in boxing. I've sort of been around press conferences since 2010. Loads of people like Don Charles, Spencer Fearon. I've seen how people have become famous. Just be patient. Just keep chipping away, and as you get to know people, you'll see a path open up.
Yeah,
But yeah, we'll leave it at that. Obviously, it's however long it takes you, but you just got to believe in yourself. You just got to go for it. And I look at people like Anna Warhouse, Michelle Joy Phelps. I look at what they've. I remember meeting Michelle when she first started her thing. I remember Coogan when he started his thing. And so you just got to have the drive. If you just
yeah,
put enough effort, people are going to recognize you.
absolutely.
Right then. For me, one of the biggest questions in boxing is it's an ongoing sort of problem, but what are the problems in boxing? What do you think are the biggest problems in boxing, and how can we deal with them?
So I think there's too much of everything. Um, so that be promoters. I think there's too many promoters. I think there's too many broadcasters that just both of those things can't work together. No broadcaster wants to work together. They want to have it on their own platform, and no promoter wants to work together because they want it on their platform for their broadcaster and for their fighters to have the advantage. So there's too much of that. Also, belts as well. There's too many versions of belts. There's regular titles, there's franchise titles, there's interim titles. You've got too many promoters, too many broadcasters, too many belts. I think ultimately that's the thing that's causing the blockers for most of these fights not taking place, because I think if you stripped things down to the bare bones and just made it about men fighting each other, I don't think anyone would necessarily shy away from anyone. I think it's when you add in all these type of things that too too many kind of logistical problems is what's holding up a lot of these things. And if I'm going to talk about too many things, there's a lot of money in boxing nowadays as well, which maybe there's even too much money in it, where people can make a lot of money by not necessarily fighting their rival or fighting the best person. So for me, that's the thing I see as a problem in boxing. People try to put it down to just promoters, just broadcasters, just pelts. But for me, all three of those things are all big issues and are stopping these fights from happening.
I mean, I completely agree. I think the thing with money, I interviewed a fighter just before you, and yeah, he said similar. But then you've got a lot of things where fighters are not. What's the best example I can give? What I believe they should do in boxing, if you look at other sports, if you want to make the most money, you've got to take on the best.
Yeah.
So that's what you've got to do in boxing. But when you're getting guys that are fighting, like take Floyd Mayweather, I just think legally, I don't think they should be letting him get away with this Logan Paul fight. And then when he fought Conor McGregor, I mean, stuff like that, I just don't think that should be legally acceptable but you don't see it in other sports. I mean, to me, Logan Paul's a kid. I know he's very big, but he's never boxed. And even McGregor, I thought McGregor was a joke because I respect him for his MMA achievements, but you've never boxed. So you're going to take
Mm.
on a world champion. I mean, like, I sparred Kell Brook. I mean, I jumped in there, did it for a bit of a challenge, but I could see the level. So it's like, I mean, you saw what Kell Brook did if you saw that video. So
Yeah.
imagine if Kell Brook was allowed, if they're going to give him the chance to fight someone like me. Like, what kind of stupid? I'm not a professional fighter. I only did it. I knew what I was getting myself into. I just thought, I know him on a personal level. I've known him for over 10 years. I thought, yeah, look, it's going to get me some views. So what I'm saying, do you think that's something that should change, where you've got to control the quality of the fights that are happening? Because if you're talking about Mayweather versus Logan Paul, that's not a fight. You might as well. That's like a father. I'm very careful the way I talk. I don't exaggerate. To me, that's like father versus son. Floyd was
Yeah.
just playing around with him. And anyway, long enough question. So, would you say the quality of fights needs to be controlled?
Yeah, definitely. And the point you made about in other sports, you have to either compete at the top level or face the best person to be able to make the most money. That was true back in the day. A lot of people talk about like the Four Kings era of boxing and say, well, that was back when the best fought the best. Yeah, they fought the best because that was also the best money available to them. And not a lot of people always look into that. You know, when Sugar Ray Leonard fought Duran, it was the best money available to him. So for me, it's changed because you don't have to fight the best to get that money now. And like you say, there needs to be something in the place that stops that, because it's changed what fighters are chasing. We see it all the time now. I did a video on my channel last week where I did a rant about Marius Bradis. This is one of the best boxers in the world, but at the latter stages of his career now, when he needs money, he's not going to make the most money by fighting Lawrence Okoli or Ilunga Makabu or one of the other cruiserweight champions. He sees it as he has to fight Jake Paul to get that money. And then that's when that becomes an issue, because we get lesser fights. And if the best are, if Maris Bradis isn't going to fight Lawrence Okoli's pool of opponents then becomes shorter and shorter as well. So it doesn't just affect him. Like you say, there needs to be something in place that the best fighting the best is the biggest reward. I don't know how that can happen because there is so many belts and there's so much money and there's so many broadcasters. We could get a Triller come in for a purse bid and put up 15 million for a fight because they feel like they can, and then the value of that fight suddenly goes up. So I think there is just people playing around with too much money and worrying about what the numbers do for their platform rather than what that fight does for people like me and you as boxing fans.
Well, I think it's not hard to solve. I'd say the quickest way I can explain it, I just think there needs to be legal. I think the government need to get involved. And, well, yeah, first of all, it's too many belts. I think you need to have champions. But you look at other sports, you've got one Wimbledon winner, you've got one what do they call it in golf, the something tour. You've only got
Yeah,
one tour in basketball. You've got the MVP, and there needs to be etc etc. You've got all these golden rings that Michael Jordan had. But in boxing, and I'm glad you mentioned the Marius Bradis. I'll be very objective because a lot of fans will attack fighters, but I would say, don't get me wrong, I think what Bradis did was very cringeworthy. But in a way, you got to sympathize with him because this man, like, I don't think he's scared to fight a Coley, but I think it's a sad situation where he's saying, "All right, I'm Marius Bradis. Obviously, I can't sing, I can't dance, and I can't act. So boxing's how I make my money. In order for me to get as much money before I retire, I'm going to try and fight Jake Paul," and that's cringeworthy. So it is cringeworthy, but at the same time, it's sad that a world champion. And if you think that's a fight, listen, I'd spar Jake Paul tomorrow, and I'd tell him, "You can hit me as hard as you can." I'm not saying I can beat him, but I'd be willing to let him hit me as hard as he can. Bredis, I'll spar him, but I'm not going to tell him to. Hell no. I say, please, yeah, I'm a kid. I'm a 31-year-old, but try not to kill me. But it's not a fight. And that's the sad part where a world champion's asking to fight this kid. So what I'm saying is that if you compare it to other sports, you don't hear of footballers or tennis players. They don't seem to be having financial problems. Is it concerning that a lot of our greatest fighters, people like so many people I've met on a personal level, Joe Frazier, Roy Jones Jr., Thomas Hearns, Marvin Hagler, Mike Tyson, you see them having to do these after dinner tours, and I meet the people, I talk to these people off camera, and it's like, I remember when meeting Joe Frazier, I met him like 5 months before he died. And I hope I'm not going on too long, but it's like you're meeting an old man. Like, I met Joe Frazier. This guy's old enough to be my granddad. And here he is coming to the UK. If it's because he wants to, that's fine. But he's coming to the UK because he's trying to cash in on his name. And he died later that year. So I thought the last months of his life, he's not even living life. He's just having to go to these silly little shows, and you're having to. But I've ranted long enough. So is that a concern where you see so many boxers financially struggling? Because to me, I think that's part of the issue of why fighters chase these exhibition fights.
yeah, it's one of the saddest things about our sport, because unlike a tennis or a golf or any of those kind of sports, don't get me wrong, as physically tough as they are, the toll and the risk that you're taking every time you step out onto a tennis court or a golf course is nowhere near the risk of every time you step into a boxing ring. And the reward just simply isn't there, because one of the things is it's such a boxing's so time consuming. I think for a lot of these people, fighters, most of them train from 8 or 9 years old. They learn that way of life right through till they box to their mid 30s, let's say. Then they get to that and they've never had anything else in life other than boxing. That adrenaline's never there. So they reach a place then where money, they're trying to chase things. And if they haven't earned enough money, that can go very quickly. And you're right, there needs to be something in place that's a little bit more caring, whether that be a kind of more standard kind of fight purse process where people get paid a certain amount for certain type of fights that always make sure that they're compensated, or there's some kind of aftercare system where people like the British Border Control or whatever are looking after these fighters and teaching them ways to make money, or whether it's getting them into training fighters, whether it's getting them into punditry or anything like that. There does need to be more for a lot of these boxers, because it is really sad when the one that always sticks out in my head, Evander Holyfield being on Celebrity Big Brother in this country with
Yeah.
a bunch of Towie and Geordie Shore people and whatever, no discredit to them, but a bunch of nobodies in the grand scheme of things. You got Evander Holyfield that beat Mike Tyson, Evander Holyfield that was arguably the greatest cruiserweight of all time, one of the greatest heavyweights, just sat there in a room where he didn't care about anyone else in there, didn't really want to be there, but had to be there for probably what, £1 million, if that. And look, when you think of the grand scheme of things, that's not a lot of money for someone like him, but he needed that desperately at the time. So yeah, it always makes me sad seeing a former fighter have to kind of stoop to lows.
I think one of the biggest issues, we are going to go into more positive subjects, don't worry. But when I spoke to this fighter, Jack Hughes, just before you, but a lot of fans are very negative because a lot of it's like, what is it with this whole undefeated record? Because the thing is, if you fight people, you're going to lose. And if you was to get these fans, and if I could talk to them face to face, yeah, but I'd say I don't understand what you're talking about. People lose in every single sport. Like I remember when I was in school, I got an A in GCSE English. I got an A in history. I wasn't really trying, but I'm good at those subjects. But even though I got an A, I got some of the questions wrong. But that's just I didn't really try. Like I'm English, I'm good at. But look, I got some of the questions wrong. Bill Gates, doesn't he get things wrong? Boris Johnson, look what he's been doing with the garden parties. But I can go on and on and on. I don't understand this unrealistic mindset that you've got to win every single fight. I'm sorry, hasn't everyone lost fights? Muhammad Ali lost fights. Mayweather lost as an amateur. You could say he lost the first Jose Luis Castillo. So what can people like you and me? Obviously, we're trying to do what we can with our channels, but I say a big part of it is the fans, because you're getting people that are trying to say they've got unrealistic expectations. Like even if, let's just say for argument's sake, my sparring session with Kell Brook, pretty much all of it's been positive feedback. But yeah, sometimes I've got the occasional someone said to me, "Oh yeah, but you're just running around," and as soon as he tries to hit, yeah, but look, usually I'm quite aggressive. I'm as a flipping world champion. You realize how rock hard those punches were.
Hmm.
So as an example, it's like you come with this unrealistic negative talk. So then a lot of fighters, then I guess they become disillusioned by that. So I say that's something we need to change. Do you see that changing with fans?
I don't know whether like it's the fans to blame, or whether I think Floyd Mayweather's played the biggest part in it, because
Yeah.
he was the biggest money maker in the sport, the biggest face of the sport for this generation. And that was all based around his undefeated image. And I just think this new wave of fighters have all grown up like myself, watching Floyd and see him as the what you need to be able to make this money. So I think you need to stay undefeated. But it's something that needs to change. Growing up, I had Calzaghe and Mayweather, who were both undefeated. Andre Ward shortly afterwards, and I think that if you came along at that sort of time, you would have thought that that was the gold standard and what you need to aspire to. But there's many great fighters that have lost and come back. Arguably, the pound for pound number one in the world, Canelo Alvarez, took a defeat and's come back and got to the top of the tree. So it does need to change. I don't know whether it's a fan thing, because I think most real boxing fans kind of see through that undefeated thing. I think a lot of us have an appreciation for coming back and proving yourself, but there does need to be a change, I think, just in terms of fighters being a little bit scared to lose that record.
Well, I'll just say quickly. I mean, yeah, I don't think they're scared, but I think it's more. But it's the fact that it's going to affect your financial status. And even with me, I'd say it publicly. Like, if I'm good enough to get to a professional level, I'd be willing to do my best to take on fights. Like, even if I think I'm going to lose, I'm not scared of losing because obviously I've got in with Kell Brook. But I'd say publicly, obviously money's money. So like if I feel that a loss is gonna take my money way down, I'll say it publicly. Like I don't care about you lot. Like why should I take a loss if I'm gonna then make a lot less money? Like I went to the shop the other day. I bought a pair of trainers for £154. I was planning to spend £100, but so when I bought it, I had to say, oh, you know what? Forget the other stuff I was gonna buy. I have to buy it another time. So this is what
Mm.
fighters are saying, not in so many words, but they want to be able to go to their shop. They want to be able to go to Savile Row, or they want to go buy a nice house, and that's the primary focus. It's not scared, but you just want to make as much money as possible. I will leave that subject alone for now, I guess. What is it you enjoy most about boxing? I mean, of all the sports you could have chosen, also, I know you mentioned your background, your father, but the question though, what is it you enjoy most about it?
I think it's just when I first started getting into boxing,
Yeah.
I think I was the only one of my age group that knew anything about the types of fight I was watching. I think people knew about Mayweather, they knew about Hatton, they knew about Pacquiao, but I was watching fights beyond that, and I felt like I was the only person in the world watching those fights at the time. And
Well,
it gave me like a special feeling. And obviously that wasn't the case. There would have been thousands others watching it, but just the time at my age, I couldn't go into school and say, "Did you see this fight of the weekend?" No one would have seen it. And for me, it just felt really kind of inclusive, and it was something that I fell in love with. But it's the drama of it. It's the intensity of the highest level, where you watch a fight and you almost feel tired after watching it because you feel like you've had to concentrate that much because something's going to change. I think I got lucky at the time I came through watching it. Pacquiao Marquez, Mayweather Hatton, Vasquez Marquez, Donaire, all these type of fights. I was watching all-time great fights when I first started watching boxing. So I think I got accustomed to quite a good level early on. So just the back and forth, the intensity, and then I think as you get older and you understand the sport a little bit more, the narratives that come into these type of fights when you get someone, the example I was using recently, um, Julio Cesar Martinez at flyweight and Sonny Edwards. If those two were to fight, Julio Cesar Martinez has beaten Sonny Edwards' brother in the past. Sonny Edwards has spoken out and done a campaign against cheaters in the sport. Julio Cesar Martinez has failed a test. Them two fighting, and their styles are completely different. And how will that match up? When you put together all these narratives and stuff, it just makes me really excited. And I think that's it for me. Just how intense the highest level of that sport is something that I really admire.
oh yeah, no, it's definitely a great way to phrase it. What have been some of the greatest fights you've ever witnessed? So watched. So I know you've mentioned a few. You've mentioned Pacquiao Marquez. Well, when you say Pacquiao Marquez, let's just say the whole was it four fight? You can
Yeah,
mention
four
any of
fight.
those fights. But listen, anything in the history of boxing, the Alis, the Foremans, the Ray Leonards. What have been some of the best fights you've ever watched?
So the one for me throughout history that I always go back to was Rafael Bazooka Limon versus Bobby Shakoon. And it was just such an unbelievable fight. It was their fourth fight. They had a four-fight series. And the first three were all great fights, but they were not necessarily all-time great fights. They were just really exciting. But the fourth fight, there was like a real narrative going into it. Limon had kind of got the better of them throughout the rivalry. Bobby had said that he was going to retire from boxing due to promising his wife that he would. and then he ended up taking another fight, and his wife couldn't handle it anymore. And she ended up actually committing suicide. So he came back and dedicated that fight to her. So you got a different Bobby Shakur in that fight. Like he fought like just a man that was on a mission. And even in late in the fight where it looked like the tide was turning, he was going to get beat again, he just found another level and just brought it out of him. That 15th round is one of the old 15 rounders. If anyone goes back and watch that, that 15 round was just phenomenal. So yeah, that fight always stands out to me. But in my lifetime, I think Vasquez versus Marquez, they had a 4-fight series, and I think their third fight is the one that stands out for me.
That's good, man. I'll definitely have to check some of those out. You're obviously a very knowledgeable guy. What do you do sort of away from boxing? Do you have any other sporting interests?
Yeah, so to be honest, football's like my boxing's the sport I love the most, but football's the one that I can actually sort of dabble in and actually do a bit. I've been playing football since I was like 4 years old. At my school, they started at 5 years old, and my dad took me down the year before to play with the older lot. So growing up, I ended up being quite good at an early age because I was always playing with older kids. So sort of
Oh wow.
around sort of 10 or 11, I was playing at sort of academy level and doing okay and sort of really enjoying football. But then got into my early teenage years and realized that everyone else was playing football and enjoying it. I kind of became a little bit, I was so used to winning and playing at a high level, it didn't become about enjoyment anymore. But then sort of gave it a break for a little while, and I've got back into it ever since I was about 17, and I've just fell in love with it again. So football's kind of my actual sport that I can do at a good level. So yeah, football takes up a lot of the evenings and stuff, but during the daytime, it's a 9 to 5 job.
Okay, you ever thought about trying to cover football the same way you cover boxing?
No, just no, I don't sort of have the same passion for it when I'm covering it. As much as I love playing football and as much as I love watching Liverpool and the Premier League and stuff, I do tend to find that if you really want to cover everything, there's so much to it. I mean, covering boxing in itself is quite a consuming task, knowing all the world champions, knowing who's got a mandatory, knowing what fight's been cancelled, which one's coming up, which one's been rescheduled. There's so much to follow just in boxing alone. Trying to do it with football as well is just it's too difficult. So I just stick to playing it, but I do enjoy also understanding the coaching side of it and how football is actually played, because I think that gives you an advantage as well when you're watching it.
That sounds good. I understand. With boxing, I don't. To be honest, I'm trying not to take any interest in things until it gets announced.
Yeah,
Because I don't even want to go into the whole. You got the whole AJ 15 million. I'm not even going to ask you about it because I said straight away it's got to be fake. 15 million is too much money. Who's going to pay you to? And then if it's for what 15 million to step aside, so Fury and Usyk fight. Usyk's not famous though. How's he going to? He can't speak English, or he pretends he can't. If he was to walk down London, I'm not saying nobody will recognize him, but it's going to take a very long time. So he's not going to generate that much. What 15 mil? We're just going to chuck away 50. But I don't even want to talk about that fight. Um, what are some of your favorite films? And have you ever seen any of the classic Hollywood boxing films? I won't name any. I'll let you name some. But I think boxing's got a rich history in cinema. It's a shame the sport's not doing so well these days. But you look at Hollywood, if you look at a lot of these classic films, like, boxing's right up there. So yeah, how would you respond to that?
yeah, I've seen a few of them. Obviously, all the Rocky films, I think, as a kid, is one of the things that helps you get into it. I think if you ask any boxing fan that kind of got into it in their teenage or childhood years, Rocky will have played a part in it. It kind of dramatizes boxing and makes you think everything's like a Rocky type story. So, obviously, all the Rocky films. The Raging Bull's probably my favorite boxing film, mainly because of De Niro is one of my favorite actors. But yeah, that film always stands out for me, and it's one of the things that made me want to learn more about Sugar Ray Robinson and Jake LaMotta. I think the Ali film as well with Will Smith is one of the things that made me understand a little bit more about Ali without having to read loads of books as a kid and watch loads of documentaries and stuff. So there's been quite a few. I think sometimes they struggle to do it well, but I think there's been a few that have actually been okay. But One thing I will say at the minute,
Yeah.
I've been watching the Four Kings documentary. I don't know if you've had a chance to watch it yet. It's just landed on Amazon Prime. It's been on Showtime in the US, and I've been waiting for them to release it in the UK some way, but it's on Amazon Prime at the minute. And that's probably one of the most enjoyable documentary type things I've watched recently. So I can recommend that to you.
I haven't seen it. I've read the book Four Kings, so
Yeah.
I have to try getting around to that. But where do you see the future of boxing going? Because the quickest way I can explain it, you've got let's see, you've got AJ Fury, Usyk, and White. You've got four of the sport's biggest names and uh, four of the best heavyweights, obviously. But they're talking about fighting each other. They've been talking about it for so long. You look at other sports, if you look at football, I mean, how many times are people playing? We've just seen an entire football competition come and go. You got Arsenal play the other day, Chelsea, man. It's like these people are playing day in, day out. But in
Yeah.
boxing, I mean, bad enough you're fighting once or twice a year, if that, but then you can't even agree on a date. So, I
Yeah.
mean, do you see this changing? I don't know, I don't understand. Just get over and done in 10 seconds. Just either you want to do it or you don't. If you don't, just say you don't and move on. But do you think that's something that can change? Do you think we can see more organization in boxing? I know
Unfortunately,
we've sort of talked about it already, but no.
yeah, unfortunately I don't unless they consolidate things, whether that be consolidating belts into one, whether it be broadcasters kind of linking up with each other, whether it be promoters linking up with each other and stuff as well. I just worry that there's kind of too much going on for people to ever agree. And I mean, listen, looking boxing at the minute, Eddie Hearn doesn't get along with Frank Warren or Bob Arum. Bob Arum doesn't get along with Al Heyman. You know, Bob Arum doesn't really get along with Oscar De La Hoya. There's so many at the top level. There's so much disagreement that I think these fighters as well, when they're promoted by an Eddie Hearn or they're promoted by a Bob Arum, they take their sides and ultimately it becomes their battle as well. So yeah, I don't hold out much hope because you'll have Eddie Hearn and Dillian White's here saying you need to get 80-20 isn't enough for you. You need to be making sure you get more. And then you'll have Bob Arum and Tyson Fury's here going, no, screw them. You deserve to be 80%. You deserve all that money. And then the conflict just keeps going and going. And they're asking WBCs for extensions and they're granting it. The best thing that can happen here is the WBC say, no, next purse bid, it happens, or you either make a deal or it happens on that Friday, because the longer you extend it, the more problems you have.
Yeah, let's just hope so. Hopefully, we see a change in future. But I guess yeah, we'll finish for today. Like last question I'll ask you is what are some of the biggest fights you see actually happening?
In terms of actually happening,
Actually happening.
I'm not really sure. I think Spence versus Ugas has obviously been mentioned. I think that's a big fight at welterweight. I think the one that has kind of been more rumored in the past 2 weeks is Canelo versus Jamal Charlo. I think that's a really big fight. We look at how big Canelo's fight against Caleb Plant was, how big his fight against Billy Joe Saunders was. Those two guys do not have the profile of Jamal Charlo in the US. So I think this is a really big fight in the US. I think that will be kind of the most sort of realistic big fight that we'll see. But apart from that, I mean, outside of that, it's the heavyweights, and we don't really know if they're going to happen. Also got the lightweights. We could potentially see Haney or Loma against Cambosis. I think they're big fights, especially in Australia. I mean, that'll be a massive occasion, but it's just whether these fights get made. I always caveat it with, as much as we want these fights, the chances of them happening are always 50-50. So, yeah.
No, it's all right. I mean, we'll just see what happens. We just stay positive and hopefully people like you and me can start trying to influence, start trying to get people in boxing to think differently. But
Yeah,
yeah, look,
definitely.
it was a pleasure talking to you. I wish you all the
Thank you very
best with
much.
your I wish you all the best with your channel, and I'll look out for your videos in future.
Cool. Thanks for having me on, mate.
Anytime. Have a nice evening.
And you.